pledge.
What are these freaks?
Let's wait for Bill. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Press the button in the box. Don't forget, we have to do the security deposit.
Oh, like that. Public hearing?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. A couple of things we wanted to add to the agenda. We could add this at the very end. This is in regards to the Unified Solar Permit. And
The
then,
Sojourner Truth statue thing, I'd like, is that okay?
you'd like what?
Do we add that now?
That's what I was doing.
Okay.
Also, the Sojourner Truth statute resolution at the end. Bills and claims we already have. Okay. That was it as far as the additions, right?
I had one thing. I had as an email asking that we talking about the planning board. We don't have the actual
So we have that
conversation.
in exec. Let's do that in exec. Right, because you were talking about a personnel.
Or is that different?
No. Actually, it was all public stuff.
Okay, I thought you had an exact
And
session
I don't
thing.
want to be here late, so I just want to keep going. I want to
Okay.
talk about it, so we can talk about it some other time.
Were you talking about
Talking about it?
appointing a new chair?
No, I guess. I don't know.
I thought that is what
Or
your
is this
email
a
was
different
about.
thing?
I want to see if we have any criteria for the planning board chair. I want to talk about whether we want to set any vision or guidance for the planning board with the new chair. I want to talk about a build-out projection for the MPR zone, and I want to talk about wastewater treatment capacity. But not tonight. I just want to talking about that tonight so we can make some plans.
Gotcha. So like a new business at the end,
Yeah.
please put it on the next agenda thing?
Sounds good. Well, yeah, that's why I made the request by email a couple weeks ago, so we could
Gotcha.
talk about it.
I'm gonna squish in, it's hard.
Okay. Then I motion that we approve the agenda as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item here, announcements. Anybody have an announcement?
Happy Valentine's Day.
Cool. I'm going to just stick this in the announcements portion. So when I was at the Conference of Mayors over the weekend and on Monday, there was a discussion about a law that's being included in the governor's budget regarding, they're calling it small cell deployment. This has to do with wireless infrastructure. It feels like a law that was written by lobbyists on behalf of the wireless industry. So I circulated some information to our board late this afternoon. I'd like for us to take a look at it. Because what I think we might end up considering is at least asking our state legislators to hit pause on this legislation and remove it from the state budget.
Is that a Nikon position, or is it on their agenda?
It's not one of their
or-
top 10 legislative agenda items, but it is, because it was not on
Yeah, I was gonna
anyone's
say-
radar.
I
It
was
just
gonna
ended
say
up in
that,
the budget.
yeah.
It was actually something NICOM has been focused on for a while because it's gone on in other states, but New York thought that it was not going to happen here, and then and what's curious about it is that there's no involvement of money, like why is it in an executive budget, but it would definitely impact us locally, because part of the problem is that it limits fees, it mandates certain procedures, and it requires municipalities to provide certain access to certain infrastructure. The mayor from Rye has been dealing with this for a while, and he's very concerned about a number of things in terms of noise, health issues, and just how many installations are required. So we can all take a closer look at that and then discuss that again on March 14th. Any other announcements before we go to public comment? Anyone here for public comment? You can come sit with us, and you got to speak into the mic.
I just want to make it clear, I'm talking about, this is about the landlord law.
Oh, okay, so
Is that okay? Are you open?
we have a separate public hearing for that, so,
That's the next item.
Yeah.
We'll be right
Yeah,
back.
so, okay, no one's here for general public comment, so we have a public hearing that remains open, and this is in regards to our security deposit return law. Anyone here to chat with us about that?
you're
Come chat
out.
with us.
You could just say your name.
I will. My name is Jane Schanberg.
Just use the mic so it gets
Okay.
recorded.
My name is Jane Schanberg. I've lived in the New Paltz area for 17 years. I was a homeowner until last June when I sold my home following the death of my husband the previous summer. And I moved into the village to a temporary, I thought perhaps 1 or 2 year home rental in the village. It was the first time I'd ever lived in the village. And I'm here to urge you to please pass this law because I found myself in a situation with an abusive landlord who 1 week into my tenancy, when I was walking around with a disabled young man who helps me with weeding, the landlord popped out of the bushes and started screaming at both of us, accusing us of trying to renovate his house or dig up his garden. Just this horrible, raging tirade, which of course traumatized my disabled friend who was just standing there freaking out. It went from bad to worse. I was harassed in the yard. Furniture would disappear. He wouldn't give notice on mowing. He turned it over to his wife to deal with me, stopped talking to me when I tried to confront him. And then I received a letter from them saying they weren't going to renew my lease when it was up in June, and they would, of course, respect it, but her mother had had a stroke, and they really wanted the house back, and if I could leave early, they would gladly let me out of the lease. I luckily, within about 2 weeks, found a suitable place to go, and I informed them that I was going to be leaving as of January 31st, and this landlord flipped it around and started saying he'd want additional security deposit. It just went whack. He was going to sue me, all this kind of stuff. I had to consult a lawyer. I had to go to the New Paltz precinct and report him because, after all, he had a key to my house. He'd been abusive. At one point, he plowed my car in. He plowed my car so that he had pebbles hitting the car and scratching it. It was just, it went from bad to worse. I finally sought an attorney's opinion. He told me what to do. I've done it. I'm out of the house. I am safe, thank goodness. But I do have to now go to court to get back my security deposit, to get back $100 for his expired smoke detectors, one of which was from 2003 and the other were from 2011. I've sent 3 requests for repayment of that. I've been accused of all kinds of damage. The house was pristine. A friend of mine who's a contractor came through as my witness when I moved out. So here I am having to waste court time rather than being able to rely on the landlord-tenant law. So I would urge you, I have means. I was a former newspaper reporter. I'm a blogger. I'm not a young person who's frightened of anybody. But I found myself in this very bad situation with really very little recourse. And cops couldn't do anything, although they told me to call them if he, confronted me again. So that's my story briefly. I don't want to take any more of your time, but if you could do this, I think it would help people who find themselves in a similar situation. For all I know, his mother-in-law hasn't moved in, and he could rent this house to somebody else who's less capable than me and do the same thing. So thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
No, listen, it happens, but to have it happen here after, renting in, France and Italy and East Hampton and New York City, where I never had a bad experience, and now I've had a very good experience where I've gone. It was really very, very distressing for 7 months. So I'm glad it's over, but please help everybody. Huh?
Jane, I have a quick question.
Sure, Bill.
Have you had a chance to review the law that's
I
proposed?
did. I took a look at the redlined copy online, and what specifically I liked was that it said that if they had to return it in 2 weeks, and that was a deadline I provided in an email to which this landlord hasn't answered. And today is the 2-week deadline, so tomorrow I'm going to double check, and if not, I'll head over. That it had to be returned promptly. 2 weeks is enough time. Especially since he had entered before and inspected the house without even notifying me, even while I was still technically a tenant. Also, that if they were going to deduct anything from the security deposit, that it had to be itemized. Very, very good. Also, that there was that phrase, normal wear and tear. Also very good, because there certainly could be normal wear and tear. But there are extreme situations, too. I mean, I did look for a long time for a place to move early on, and I saw some pretty horrific-looking places where, there were students, and it was messy, and I understand there's another side to this, too. So what I did see, those provisions, I thought were very, very good. And would, in my situation particularly, have really been something I could rely on.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Jane.
Anyone else, public comment related to the security deposit law? I think we should continue to keep this public hearing open. Everyone good with that? Okay, we have a consent agenda. I have a motion that we move the consent agenda. Second. All in favor? Aye. Moving on to the business agenda. David, if you don't mind, we're going to ask Tal to chat with us. So, Tal recently joined the Millbrook Preserve Inc. board. Yeah, come on up. We met recently, KT, myself, and Supervisor Cortez, and we worked on the draft agreement between the town and the village. What we're looking to do is having a similar agreement with the village and Millbrook Preserve Inc., and a similar agreement between the town and Millbrook Preserve Inc. So you want to just update us on your review of the draft?
Yeah, sure. As it stands, so it's still a draft, but the town did look over it. Their attorney looked over it, so they made a lot of edits to the original draft that Millbrook Preserve Incorporated provided. Tim provided some edits. So this is kind of where we're at. It is very different from the original draft that we had submitted to you. But I did tell Tim, the board did at least vote approving this draft. So I think we're definitely making progress. There was nothing in particular that we came up with that we had a problem with. It's definitely still a working document. I know that it sounds like Christie and the town both are thinking similarly about incorporating the rec plan. So right now, we had taken out all reference to the recreation plan. I actually now, having talked to Christie, understand why they're definitely going to press to put it back in, because the recreation plan is actually mentioned numerous times in the conservation easement. The important thing to think about when it comes to the recreation plan is that it is a living document. Nothing in it is written in stone. It's not a distinct proposal. It's just going through the types of projects that, in theory, could happen. So as far as putting together the conservation easement, it was important for them to have the rec plan because they needed to have some concept of what could possibly go on the site. Considering the conservation easement is in perpetuity, they had to have some specific vision of what could possibly happen, even if it's 50 years from now. So, the other element to point out is that, nothing in the recreation plan suggests that, and by putting it in the memorandum of agreement, it would not suggest that, you guys have approved anything, you or the town. Everything would still have to be reapproved, go through the whole process. So I'm just giving you that context. So I know that that's probably the one other, I would consider major change that probably Christie and the town, they will want to put back reference to the rec plan. Otherwise, I think we're getting close.
I think that, I mean, my concern with the rec plan is that as a standalone document, there's no context for what you just explained.
Yeah.
So it needs a preamble or something on the front end that
Sure.
says, these
Yeah.
are the 87 different things that can happen.
Sure.
We're not saying that all of them can happen.
Yeah.
But if each individual piece happens, here's the guidelines that,
Sure.
rough guidelines that we
Yeah.
have so far.
Yeah.
Because I think that we're all on the same page that we want a light footprint on the
Yes.
preserve.
Yes.
So we don't want all of those things to happen.
Right.
But we get that
Yeah.
you need scenario planning for any of the things that could happen.
Sure.
But I just have a concern for a document that on its own doesn't reflect that when you have so much in there.
Sure.
It sounds like we want to do everything.
Right.
Or it's unclear.
Yeah.
So we just need some clarity on the front end. I don't
Yeah.
know if you're okay with it going back in the MOA.
Yeah,
with
I would
that.
really, I would really struggle with having it included in the MOA
Yeah.
because, you know, as we discussed, I think it's an aspirational document.
Sure.
I think it makes a great deal of sense for Millbrook Preserve, Inc. to have it listed as, or included as a bunch of what-ifs.
Yeah.
But if our board has to review it and decide what's in it, what's not in it, I feel like, you know, the idea of this agreement is to just have a formal arrangement between the municipality and Millbrook Preserve, Inc.
Right.
So Millbrook Preserve, Inc. can do basic stuff like some fundraising and
Sure.
like, let's get some trails in there.
Absolutely.
But all of these what-if things, and because it's mentioned in the conservation easement, I don't necessarily see that as a reason why we now have to deliberate on a rec plan that's
Sure.
aspirational.
Sure.
It's
Well-
sure, it's mentioned, but
Sure. Well,
that
and
doesn't
I-
mean that we have to sign off on a
Right.
plan that I'm not prepared to
Right. Well, and I
deliberate
think,
on.
so I think the nuance here is that you don't technically have to sign off on the plan, but you would be signing off on the agreement that would have mention of the plan. So perhaps one way to work this out would be to do two things. One would be to add, like you said, KT, language to the rec plan, like a preamble, that better discusses all this and defines what it actually is so that everyone's clear. And then if there's any mention in the agreement, it would be as light as possible and as clear as possible that it has more to do with being in line with the conservation easement. Because I believe that that's where Christie's gonna come from, is that it's less about us agreeing on some sort of plan that we're about to move forward in conjunction with the rec plan, but more about the rec plan being consistent with the conservation easement. So that in 50 years from now, if someone wanted to build a parking lot, they kind of have this, they have something that's in line with the conservation easement to, in theory, work off of. This is how I'm trying to understand this. But I definitely share your concern.
Yeah, I get it. It occurs to me sitting
It's
here now,
very-
it's
I'm
not
going in
really a
circles with
plan.
it.
It's like a rule book or a guide. I think some of the issue is with language. When you say
think so,
plan,
too. I
it
know.
infers that all of this stuff is gonna happen.
I know.
It's more of a rule book.
I know, so I think there's a lot of semantics here,
Yeah.
and this is why I've been struggling with it this entire time too. But it is mentioned in the conservation easement. So because it's mentioned there, I think there's some way of getting it into the MOA with, again, sort of making it more about the conservation easement than it is about us signing on to a bunch of stuff that you're clearly not on board with or that we're not even going to pursue.
I mean, I want to be clear, I understand that that helps them when they go to funders, so they can say,
Yeah.
in concept, the village board or town board has already agreed to this at a conceptual level.
Yeah.
Right, and then on a project-by-project basis, you then come back to us and say, more specifically, this clearly defined particular project sign off on. So I
Absolutely.
understand the function.
Yeah.
I just, like you said, I think there's some semantics here that
Yeah.
if we could wordsmith, it would be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know that we can change the name of the rec plan.
I don't think we can.
It's not really a plan.
I think what's also really
know.
challenging
Yeah.
about this type of approach
Sure.
is that it seems like the community and like the plan that has been articulated years ago for this
Yeah.
preserve is just low-tech trails,
I know.
you know, some environmental ed, you know, let's
Yeah.
use this property for those reasons.
Yeah.
And then we don't really know how the community will truly use this property until we allow it to happen. And I feel like once it's being used, then we'll see, well, do we need an amphitheater? Do we need a parking lot of this size? Do we
Sure.
need these other things? And then those projects will be, you know, thought about individually.
Yeah.
And then you'll see what you want to develop. But this idea of kind of predicting what we might want,
I know.
I just really struggle with signing on to an agreement
Yeah.
that references a plan that is like really vague and aspirational and
Yeah.
probably includes a bunch of stuff that I would never be comfortable with.
Yeah. Well, and I think the tricky part is that the conservation easement actually does reference this rec plan as well. So.
Sure, it references a rec plan,
But we all
the
signed
rec
that before
plan.
it existed.
The
I
rec
know.
plan
I know.
can also be like what our community has always talked about, just some basic low-tech trails and a
Sure.
property that's used for environmental ed.
Sure.
Like,
Well,
why can't the rec plan just say that?
That's right, repeat what's in the
Yeah.
agreement.
Yeah.
Conservation.
Well, I think because this is, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a good question. I think as far as what the Wallkill Valley Land Trust is looking for, they want to see more. They want to see all the possibilities, because for them, that's, as sort of enforcing this easement, they want to see these possibilities written out on maps and have some sense that it's been thought of. Again, it doesn't necessarily refer to what's realistically going to happen. I mean,
But that could all exist without being tied to the MOA or the CE. That could be internal.
but it's already in the CE, so
Right,
that's the
yeah.
thing. That's
Well,
the part
word,
that,
the phrase rec plan is, but
Yeah.
none of this aspirational stuff is in the
Right.
CE.
right. Yeah.
And obviously, the CE is a counterbalance to some of the things that we're saying, because
Sure.
the CE will constrain all of that from
Yes.
happening.
Yes. Well, and so will the town and village, because ultimately, we wouldn't even write a proposal for funding without coming to the village and saying, hey, this is what we're thinking about. What do you guys think? Is this something that you would approve? I mean, so there would be an entire process before we'd even search for funding. And so, yeah, I mean, once we actually got going, it wouldn't be like, okay, let's get out the rec plan and see what, our number one was. I mean, so it's not even necessarily about how we would initially approach the project. So, I mean, I'm just wondering, I already know that Christie's going to want some language. So I'm just wondering how we can work on, like you said, adding something to the rec plan. And we're gonna have to just work on whatever language they come back with the MOA. because I know that this is important to them.
I-
So,
For a second.
yes.
I think the desire in spelling things out at the beginning, even if it is aspirational, is to do something which has no bias, which is not attached to any particular project. The concern with not having something spelled out, even if it might be aspirational, is that then, as you just mentioned, the times you revisit the issue is when there's something someone wants to do. And when there's something specific someone wants to do, they have a desire to do it. And that's not as pristine and as unbiased as when you do it at the beginning. So I understand. So, yeah, there is a logic to both sides.
Yeah, I feel like both sides are expressing risk aversion. So Christie wants to avoid risk by knowing all the probabilities. We want to avoid risk by not signing on to stuff that's so amorphous and that somebody could come back in 2 years and say, well, village board signed off on this rec plan that we could have this amphitheater or whatever.
I
fill in
think
the
that's why
blank.
the language is very important, because I think the part of the language that absolutely would be included would be that the village, this does not suggest that the village is approving anything in the rec plan. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so that's not lawyer speak, but it would in some way say that just because you're signing this agreement in no way suggests that you have signed off on anything in the rec plan, that we still have to come to you for every single project, obviously, for approval.
That's what the agreement says. I mean, my
Yeah.
struggle with this is like, I feel like at every turn, like, the initial agreement between the town and the village include references to stuff that none of us really were able to wrap our minds around because we
Sure.
were unfamiliar with it. And now you're saying, now you're citing a CE that has reference to a rec plan that, we didn't really anticipate what was, everything that was involved. And now again, you're asking us to put something in a document that we can't really
Yeah.
wrap our minds around, like the future impacts. I
Sure.
really feel like what we need to do is
Yeah.
crawl before we run.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
Okay, what about a third way, and I'm just thinking on my feet here,
Sure.
is that we do have a shorter rec plan, as Tim described, with the light footprint. It still could be called the plan, and then
Sure.
that document that's being called a rec plan right now could be the rule book for each possible component or something.
Yeah.
So then you both have a rec plan
Yeah.
that we're comfortable signing off on, and you have all these criteria that the land trust
Sure.
has comfort that Millbrook Preserve Inc. isn't just thinking things.
Yeah, sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I think as far as we're concerned, we could absolutely do that. And obviously, I'm in addition, since we're here in meeting, I'm trying to also anticipate. I'm
Right.
trying to anticipate what everyone else is going to say, because obviously that's important too. So if it were just me sitting here, I would be happy to say, yeah, we could cut it down to a page, or, we could make it a lot shorter.
I'd be happy to meet
but
with you and Christie if you want to do that
maybe we
too.
maybe we could try to figure something out. Because I know that Christie, they have their responsibilities that they're definitely going to want covered. So I'm also just trying to anticipate some of their concerns. So maybe we could meet to try to figure that out. I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Cool.
Because at this point, I don't think it's going to go away. I'm just being
Yeah, I mean,
realistic.
I think it's a valuable document. It's
Yeah.
just, do we as a board feel comfortable
Yeah.
signing off on it? And
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not really feeling that.
Sure, and I think it didn't capture a lot of what the village was looking for in this project. I mean, that's a lot of what I've been hearing. So maybe even as an addendum, there could literally be what we would consider the first phase, and better outline what we had talked about in terms of the basic trail building, the bridges, perhaps some small grants for educational programming. So maybe we could better illustrate kind of what the first big push would be.
A multi-year planning kind of thing.
Sure.
My experience with grants too is that grants like become available, and then you see an opportunity and you're like, well, we could apply for that grant for this thing that might fit with this project.
Yeah.
So the idea that you can anticipate what grants might exist in the future,
Yeah.
I think is also like we're setting ourselves up for
Yeah.
something very difficult.
Well-
Like what I really struggle with here
Yeah.
is this idea that, well, because the phrase rec plan was included in the CE, now we're bound by something.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I want to avoid. I don't want to have language in this rec plan that's then referenced in this MOA that then handcuffs us again in the future.
Yeah, and I
This is
don't-
what happens,
Yeah.
this is what's happened several times now.
Yeah, well, and I think the key is that I don't think it has to handcuff any of us. I don't think, and that's kind of, again, with the phrasing, I think that there's a way to, I mean, again, without everything that even will be imagined to actually executed, you still have to approve. So in even just that respect alone, there's nothing that you're actually approving in the rec plan itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but people can still come and say, you said this, and it's on paper, and.
Okay,
and-
so you're concerned about almost,
Rubber stamping something by not really, I understand that that's totally the process.
Sure.
And it could be 5 different people sitting at the table, depending on when this comes down.
Sure.
And they could easily say, I would have never signed that, and I don't like this particular project, so there's lots of factors
Sure.
here.
And those 5 different
Yeah.
people will be looking at a project that they've never been required to consider, and then
Right.
they'll have to look at it with fresh eyes.
yeah, absolutely.
Which is
No,
why
I-
context is really important.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I have quoted a couple times over the years the town supervisor in one of our very first conversations about this. He said, "I'm terrified of future me, the people who will sit at these boards in the future." And I think that's why it's really important to handcuff ourselves to some extent. I mean, I think the handcuffing is the very purpose of a conservation easement. It's the very purpose of a preserve, is to make sure that you set out at the beginning some pretty strong firewalls that, and I'm not saying foreclose everything, but I think you do need to, handcuffing is exactly the goal of this sort of thing.
This is
Right,
not,
but
this is the
that makes me
opposite of what
think-
you're
yeah.
describing. This is the exact, what we're trying to talk about is the most limited rec plan possible. So what I'm
Handcuff me to
worried
that.
about is identifying things that could end up in a rec plan that future boards might not think make sense, and then they're like, well, you have to build an amphitheater, it says amphitheater.
I think we can find a way. I think that we've identified the issues, and this was helpful, and, yeah.
Yeah. And.
And I hear you.
Yeah. And I have a sense too that the town is struggling over this exact issue too, so, yeah, as much as I wish we could just say we could totally scrap it, I don't think it's going away.
That's
So
okay.
if we
We'll,
can
we'll,
find a
we'll
way-
find a path.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Having a lot of deja vu.
All over again?
So, to be continued.
Yes, yes. Hopefully, we can sit down and work on the language. But I hear you, Tim, and I mean, in the end, yeah, I can say that from the board standpoint, we're on board, and we want to work with you to figure out what's going to work for you. So let's try to do that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being the liaison and
Yes.
being the link. Thank you.
all.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep.
David, you want to join us?
Hello, David Gilmore, Village Planner. It's been a while since I think I've been to this board to visit, but I put on the agenda, I requested to have put on the agenda a briefing on the 2017-2018 Stormwater Management Program and the Natural Hazard Plan Progress Report and request for public input. The Clean Water Act, which New York State has adopted the auspices of, provides for municipal separate stormwater systems to be managed, essentially the stormwater system of the community to be managed, and there needs to be compliance with annual permitting requirements in conjunction with a locally adopted stormwater management program, and then there's an annual report. The stormwater management program is on the village projects page on the village website. I just wanted to provide my introduction to the annual update of the stormwater management programming compliance process, where we have to submit an annual report by June 1st of every year. So the Stormwater Management Committee, which is Blue Terwilliger, your DPW Superintendent, Brian Arms, the Chief of the Building Department, and myself, will draft the annual report. We've been making progress across all of the dimensions or elements of the stormwater management program: public information, public education and outreach, illicit discharge detection and elimination, good housekeeping in terms of the DPW facilities, including our streets and stormwater conveyance systems and other aspects of public properties, as well as management and oversight of land development in terms of erosion and sediment control and other aspects of stormwater pollution prevention planning. I particularly enjoyed working on the Green Infrastructure Capital Improvement Feasibility Planning process and project, which is funded by New York State DEC and complements the stormwater management programming. So just to update you, we'll be submitting, it's due on the annual report is due June 1st, so we'll have it done with your sign off on May 16th, if that's okay, and submitted to the state on May 17th, which means that for your April 11th meeting, we'll have the draft annual report to you. So stay tuned, but we certainly welcome the public and yourselves to review the stormwater management program on the projects folio of the web page, and to call planning or building or DPW, who can help facilitate public interests and along those dimensions that I mentioned, and we'll move forward from there. Hazard planning. You'll remember at the beginning of the year, the village had a resolution with concerning the regional hazard plan. There was an update to the Ulster County multi-jurisdictional hazard mitigation plan, which was updated in 2017. Essentially, it was a 5-year update. Natural hazard planning is the idea that a number of communities facilitated under the umbrella of Ulster County Emergency Management and all of the participating jurisdictions in Ulster County think about risks to the community from things like flooding, fires, earthquakes, ice storms, ice jams, heat waves, drought. And the bottom line is the hazard, well, it's not a bottom line. The hazard plan is listed on the village's web page. I believe it's under the resources section under the building department folio, or at least it's the resources section, but the prior and current hazard plan are on the page. The community, in its aspect of the local jurisdictional planning, identified a number of projects that we seek to advance to help promote community resiliency and reduction to vulnerabilities of these natural hazards. We've made strong progress, but we continue to need to provide annual reporting and discuss, including through opportunity for public outreach, what are the mitigation efforts that are underway, as well as to provide for public input on possibly needed mitigation endeavors. For example, Carmine-Liberta Bridge was replaced, including the water line on it. Kudos to the village board and its partnership with other entities in that regard, including the water line. Dam mitigation in terms of there's been lots of water supply planning, but also making sure that there is resiliency of the impoundments that hold the village's water as part of a permitting process with New York State. There's been progress with that. And then, as you know, we have signed off on the, completed the grant-funded Water Street Culvert project replacement, which was a major identified risk within the community, that if there was a flood, the most significant risks are associated with floods, that would have taken out water lines that affected large parts of the community, including the university. So there's been progress made. Other projects are underway, like the hardening of the wastewater treatment project. We've made the hardening of the wastewater treatment plant and the sewer system, including that's in floodplain leading to it. It's an expensive proposition, but hopefully by continuing to show that we're thinking about this and making progress, and if, for example, the federal government, in their wisdom, works to help us leverage project development, hopefully we can go after funding resources like hazard mitigation monies, such as could help us harden our wastewater treatment plant that our forebears put sort of close to the Wallkill River. And it needs to be hardened, it needs to be made resilient. Likewise, but as I mentioned, the Green Infrastructure Capital Improvement Feasibility Project is working on other types of mitigation, including for flooding and severe storms, like examining ways to not only protect our sanitary sewer systems and improve and correct flows within them, but also to promote flood storage and use of bioswales and things like that, including to get water in the ground, which can recharge groundwater. You've been doing a lot with water sourcing, of course, as a village board, but also can help with things like drought resiliency, and green infrastructure can also help with if there are heat waves and severe events. The one observation that I might make is, last year I did, when I came to this board, as part of providing for an update, and you'll see the evaluation process in terms of the report forms coming before you soon, and we can post them perhaps online and put out opportunity for more public comment. But, I mentioned that the fire station project up at the corner of Henry W. Du Bois and North Putt Corners Road is an important project. It doesn't provide for hazard resiliency per se, but it certainly helps with our capability to both prepare for and respond appropriately to hazard events. And I might also add that, I do think that we see significant rainstorms frequently, and it affects our infrastructure, and there's been a pretty significant ice flow held up in New Paltz for a while now, and there's a variety of risks that we really can be exposed to. Low probability, but we need to be prepared for them. One thing I wanted to mention, is probably we get more warm weather, but then interspersed with these really cold events and almost sleet and ice, our electrical infrastructure, including utility distribution systems, are to a degree susceptible to wind, like from tornadoes, but severe storms like hurricanes as well as ice storms. I know that there was a strong effort to try to figure out how to advance microgrid and that aspect of electrical system resiliency and self-sustainability. And I might just recommend that if the board consents, and I don't know if we want to do it now, but it's a notion that I'm putting out there, is maybe that's a type of mitigation project that we actually put onto our list of projects that we're working on long-term, because microgrid or similar type electrical grid improvements can actually sort of harden or make our system more resilient to severe
Yeah, I
storm
think
events.
both the town and the village board most recently discussed the idea of a microgrid, and I think we came out of it feeling like we're okay with a resiliency project like that, but we need a green-focused power source, whereas
I know.
the earlier solutions were all too
Understood.
focused on fossil fuel.
Understood.
And we weren't interested
Right.
in resiliency if it had so much fossil fuel
Understood.
focus.
And,
So-
and handcuffed, to use the word again, for so long.
And-
Like, that, because the
Right.
initial investment is so large, the long view would tie us to fossil fuels.
But I think, so
Understood,
a
right.
green microgrid could be on that wish
Very
list
good.
of things
Right.
that would
Yeah.
help with hazard
And
mitigation.
maybe it just needs to be a mitigation project that is written broadly, so that whatever comes along, whether it be battery storage, other aspects of raising transformers out of risk, or in certain cases burying utility lines or whatever, but so that we can possibly qualify for leveraged partnership with regional governments like the county or state or federal government, but so that we can advance sustainability within the community. So something generally written, but that can advance that sort of
I don't think
aspect
there's
of.
really any momentum with power lines getting buried.
Understood,
Too
understood,
expensive.
understood.
The utilities like them above grade. I don't think it's going to happen. Maybe in new construction it will, but there's not going to be retrofits.
So that's the point, and I do recognize all that, and I'm just trying to spend a few minutes of your time and also reach out to the public to remind folks that long-range planning for mitigation of risks and also preparation for risks is important. Of course, we have a very qualified local emergency planning commission that helps in the event of disasters, and they can help inform how to get ready projects in terms of mitigation. And then also, finally, my concluding thought is just to promote businesses and also homeowners to families and households to conduct hazard like event planning, in terms of think about what are your evacuation routes, what would you do in the case of an emergency, and how do you get prepared for resiliency at your business and households. And there are resources within Ulster County plans for that purpose. So thank you very much for allowing me to be here tonight. And the other thing that I put on the agenda was that unified solar permitting
I'm going to
resolution.
come to that while you're here, so don't leave. Does anyone have any questions for David about
I do.
these two topics?
I have a question about the unified solar permit. This does not circumvent the COA process for historic properties. does it?
So the Historic Preservation Commission has jurisdiction on properties, on certain properties, including within the historic zoning district. And we updated the unified solar permit. We've been using one form. The state, we've been in this process for a long time. The state wanted us to update the form. We couldn't find documentation that we've been in this program. Absolutely. The permit is written such that if you have to get Historic Preservation Commission / CLG review and approval, that's not part of the unified permitting process and requirement. It's not streamlined process. You have to go to the Historic Preservation Commission for a COA.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, David.
Thank
So,
you.
I would like to actually move this thing, but do you want to take one or
2
two
seconds.
sentences
You bet.
to explain why? we
Clean
have this?
Energy Communities is a program of New York State. We have an opportunity to receive $5,000 if we show completion of 4 of 10 milestones. We've got the electric vehicle charging station in, Clean Fleets milestone is done. The municipal facilities benchmarking legislation was adopted, and I believe that there's data collection in that regard to understand your energy use in municipal facilities. I see you've got Green Mountain Power on there. Hey, they're giving you a smaller rate per kilowatt hour than last year. That's good news. We have adopted and achieved the Energy Enforcement Code official training, which was done, I think, last spring. And then finally, unified solar permitting we've had since 2014. We just can't find a resolution. So I just need a reaffirming resolution from this board so that then I can ship that off to the state, and we're waiting for confirmation that we've achieved our 4 milestones so that so that we can supply a request for the $5,000. We would have liked to have gone after bigger funds. However, we weren't able to achieve those resources which we would have promoted for community development planning in terms of a comprehensive plan with sustainability aspects.
I'd like to move the adoption of the unified solar permit.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Nice
Okay,
seeing you
before you leave,
all.
before you leave, so I wanted to ask, why did you have the water line on the Carmine-Liberta Bridge listed as like a hazard prevention project?
So this goes back to 2015. The bridge and the water line
No,
were
I know the
listed.
project, but I never viewed it as anything to do with hazard mitigation.
Right.
I viewed it as we were required to replace the water line because the county was putting in a new bridge. So we had to use our New York Rising money to put in a new water line.
Right.
I was not aware that there was any problem with our water line
Well,
at that
I
time.
think that it was presented that the bridge and/or water line, the bridge especially, was at a degree of risk. That was prior to my employ in this community. I don't think I mentioned it last annual visit, but, so I'm going to
Okay.
say that that's achieved and completed in
Okay.
terms of a resiliency effort,
And-
mitigation effort.
Fine. So my other question, and I'm not meaning to put you on the spot right now, but because we were talking about Millbrook earlier, can you give me a rough idea as to when this year we can expect to have construction documents for folks to bid on as far as the multi-use trail in Millbrook?
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that question.
You can give us a loose
I'm somewhat,
range.
I am definitely behind in the objectives that I wrote to you last time for when we would go to bid. The next step is to advance environmental review and certification, and so I'm expecting, if we have, I'm going to knock on wood, not for Micah, with getting through that, getting through a streamlined process to get our designers on board. It would be great if we can get to construction activities in this fall. I think that's what I said, and I really need to
So
make
bid
time.
docs, end of spring, early summer.
It's really bid docs. I mean, it's mid-February now, so we need to get a designer on board after we're at a contract with the state. So I would say bid docs in a summer time frame, and we'll see if we can get some construction done in October. Hey, we had a long fall window for construction, so that may play well if we achieve that. And I am behind and working on that.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming out tonight, David.
Okay, so next item is this proposed 2/12/23 site plan review amendments. Do we have an update on that?
Yeah, I got an email from Michael Zierler who said it's going to be discussed at the February 20th meeting. They're eager to review. If they don't have time on the 20th, I'll definitely do it on the 6th of March. But that's the latest I got from them.
And we are also waiting for comment from the planning board on the checklist for getting a certificate of occupancy. Sent that again to the planning board, I think yesterday, and they will discuss that and get back to us, so we can have it's not going to be a one-page, a two-page document that we can give to any applicants, so that there's a very clear roadmap of exactly what steps to take. So it should be pretty helpful.
Okay, so for this 2/12/23, we're going to have
Their comments.
their comments that then we can deliberate on.
That's right.
Okay, and you're expecting that we would have that mid-March?
If they can't get to it on the 20th, he says the 6th of March. And,
Okay.
you know,
All right, next item, request to waive the 30-day hold on Boom Box Club's liquor license. So we got a response back to our inquiry with our building department. I don't know where they are in terms of how many days left they have on this 30-day hold.
4.
4. So
If it's-
I motion that we, that we waive the remaining days of the hold.
Second.
All in
Yeah,
favor?
I think the building inspector asked that we, any sort of letter, that we reiterate the closing time of midnight. He's made a specific request for any document we give to them that we reiterate the closing times. I don't know if that has to be part of the motion, but I just want to throw it out there.
Yeah, I think
It then
maybe we
becomes a
should.
bar if it's after midnight,
Right.
right? So
Well, and there's
a
been a
lot of
verbal
things.
agreement, but someone wanted that in writing, that, you know, or the building department wanted
It's
that in
the
writing.
law.
So that
but
has, yeah, so that'll have nothing to do with our waiving of this hold, but I think we should do that separately. Maybe we can at least have a note from our village board asking for confirmation from this property owner or this landlord that that is how the property will be used.
Just get it in writing.
Or just like us sending a
Or
formal
why don't we just send a
statement.
letter saying, you know, we are confirming our verbal agreement, or your,
Yeah.
yeah, whatever the letter says.
Signed village board.
Yeah.
So, Alex, could you work with Bryant on getting that letter, and then we can share it with that landlord or business owner? So next item, approval of revised event application. KT, you were looking for a red line?
Yeah, I couldn't remember what the revisions were and it wasn't marked, but I think it's just the drill stuff. I thought we did that already, that's why I didn't think it was that. Nothing jumped out at me on the clean copy.
It was, the park use one had already been approved, but this one wasn't done yet at that time.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable with our clerk's office making suggestions in terms of how these
Yeah.
forms should be handled. So if the clerk's office is saying this is how the form should read, I'm good with that. So I motion we accept the new version.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next item, renewal of Green Mountain Energy. I would like for our community, both the town and the village, to take a closer look at CCA as far as, you know, just a way of, you know, creating a buying club for our community to buy electricity. You know, this has been discussed many times. I saw a presentation from an outfit that looked particularly interesting. So I think the way our agreement with Green Mountain will work, and Alex and I were discussing this earlier, that it's currently month to month. So I would like to continue with the month to month, and also explore the possibility of a CCA.
Could you define CCA for people who don't?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on, what does it stand for?
Community,
Community.
something like that.
Collaborative, yeah.
it's,
Agreement.
All right, but working together to bring the price down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's basically forming a club that purchases electricity together. CCA stands for Community, come on, Alex, you know this.
I'll ask the Google. Community choice aggregation?
That's right.
Thank you. I wasn't even close.
Wait, no.
Okay, so
community,
I had
we
the
have-
idea, yeah.
So, do we need to do anything as far as moving to month, or do we automatically end up with month to month with Green?
My understanding is that it automatically rolls over to month, but it's on my to-do list to call in the morning.
Yeah, I actually remember from when we approved this last year, it was for an initial one-year period, and then after that, it's month to month with a variable rate. So that's, because I
Yeah.
remember we actually specifically told ourselves, we have to make sure we follow up on this, because the rate may start varying in ways that we don't like.
And that's that's been the challenge with ESCOs, is that they generally get you with these attractive initial rates, and then they move to a variable, and then folks end up paying a whole lot more for power than they ever expected.
Well, if we approve this rate, and they should change the rate, that gives us, you know, well, maybe we can say, well, we didn't approve that, and we'd have to revisit it.
And we also say month to month, so.
Yeah.
I think this is just the first month, and
Right.
then, so it ends up being a rate that changes monthly. But so Alex is going to look into it further, and I hope to have some interesting information about CCAs for us to consider in the near term.
That'd be great.
Okay, next item, number 7, let's accept this bid to sell the 2004 Ford F-250 in the amount of $3,777.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next item is is related to the firefighter service award program. So when you put in a certain number of hours, then you get points that go towards a firefighter, for lack of a better word, pension fund. So this is just the collection of points based on our volunteers and the work that they did last year. So I motion that we approve the service award.
Second.
All in favor? And then the other thing is that we
I
all...
just want to say, very impressive collection of points. And when you look at it, there's a lot of activity going on there. So our firefighters continue to impress me.
I have to abstain.
Yeah, I was thinking that you should abstain, right?
Yeah.
Someone at this table actually
on
racked up
the
a bunch of
list.
points because he does a lot of volunteer work.
Recused, excuse me. Thank you. Recused.
Okay, next item, a letter in support of the Mohonk Preserves application for
Did we
accreditation
actually
renewal.
vote on that, though?
What's that?
Did we actually vote on that?
Do we?
On the approval of the, because KT jumped in just to say something.
Oh, did we actually call the
I don't think
question?
we actually called the
Okay,
question.
so, I think someone seconded it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Aye.
motion to
Aye.
approve the
Aye.
service award. Okay. And then the next item is motion to sign off on this letter in support of Mohonk Preserves renewal of their accreditation with the Land Trust
Second.
Alliance.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next item, Environmental Policy Board recommendations on water sourcing.
Yeah, the board received a copy of that before the last meeting. The Environmental Policy Board did approve a number of steps with regard to notice of the public with regard to sand and gravel wells, and decided not to extend those same recommendations with regard to artesian wells.
So I think the suggestion by EPB to have an extra public hearing or public notification
next.
anytime we do a 72-hour pump test on a sand and gravel well is a good idea. So I would like to look at that one individually and move that as a policy that our village board would follow.
So you're interested in just moving a portion of the recommendations?
There were two recommendations.
So you're the first one with the sand and gravel thing?
Yeah, if we're doing pump tests, if we're doing pump tests on sand and gravel wells, I think it does make sense to err on the side of caution and have an additional, public outreach effort. But then the other portion of the recommendation was to have public comment or public hearing anytime we drill.
So, did you just move the first one? I'm comfortable with the first one, and I have, would like to have more of a discussion on the second one.
Let's see that for next meeting.
That would be great.
You want to take action on the first part now?
I
Or you
would
want to
be
have that whole
okay with
discussion?
that. Other end of the table?
We can get one piece out of the way now, we might as well.
So my motion is that we have a thorough process, including additional public outreach, including an additional, deliberate call for the community to respond to or participate in a discussion anytime we do a 72-hour pump test for a sand and gravel well.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And then we'll
Talk about
come
the
back
other
on the
one
other
next time.
item.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so next item is, you want to move that, the Sojourner Truth?
Does anybody want to talk about it? Dan kind of.
Dan, do you want to come
about it?
and?
Yeah.
Sure, come here.
So, thank you, guys. So, the state back in November, they noted that there are apparently no statues of women on state property. And so the governor's office has said that they would like to rectify that, and there is a proposal for 2 statues, and they'd like to do additional ones, one of which has been announced that will appear in Ulster County on the Empire State Trail, which cuts through New Paltz, of Sojourner Truth. So what the town board has asked, and what we're asking you to ask, is just simply to advocate for that statue to be placed in New Paltz, since a location has not yet been selected. I spoke to the director of state parks yesterday about this potential project as well. They're excited about the idea. The funding for the project is no longer there as the state budget came out, and it's not as high of a priority as you can imagine other things are, but they still want to move forward with this. And why I think that's important is because I do think that if we as a community are really interested in it and we're willing to help out by getting a sculptor, by potentially matching some funds or trying to get grant funding for this, that they would in fact get it. Just very briefly, why I think it's important for us to do it is that Sojourner Truth is from Esopus, but when she was alive, if you had asked where she was from, she would have said New Paltz, because the boundaries have changed. And I think that she represents some of the best values of our own community as well, speaking truth to power and standing up to authority and using her own voice. And I think it would be a fitting tribute to not only have a statue of her, but to place it in our community as well. So that's why I'm asking if you guys would be willing to pass the resolution, and I also have a petition going online. It's like change.org if you type in Sojourner Truth. I think the more publicity we make around it, the more likely the state is to just simply give it to us. Great.
Thanks for your work on this.
And just one quick, so there's no potential site then revealed?
There's, we've pressed the issue, which has made them have the conversation, but prior to that, there was really very limited conversation on this topic.
Yep.
I motion we move the resolution.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thanks, Dan.
I know everyone wants to run, but I think we should go into exec session to discuss, so the current chairman of the planning board, who's served our community for decades as a village board member and as a planning board member, has announced that at the end of his term as chair, he wants to move on and take up another hobby. So we need to come up with a replacement. So I want to go into exec session to discuss just that.
Before we do that, I'd like to have a brief discussion about some planning board issues which are not executive session germane. So I think the planning board is one of the most important bodies in village government. And I think the switch to a new chairperson, it's a natural point where we could take a look and revisit how that planning board works. I know in most communities, the planning boards are not involved in the minutia of various projects. We're doing what we can to remove if someone wants to put in a deck or a patio or to get that off the planning board's docket, which is important. But I think historically, we have had in the past and do not have currently some issues and concerns with the building department. It was not as strong as we had wished it would be, and as a result of that, some of the functions traditionally under the building department have moved to the planning board, moved to the planner, and I just wonder if we might take a look at things and try and put things the way they are in most other communities. The other point I want to make, so some sort of vision, some sort of guidance. We are in a very vibrant period of development right now in this community, and I think Tim has said he wanted to, move from being no Paltz to a place where you could actually do business if you wanted to build something, and I appreciate that and have been a part of that. But we're about to get a report next couple of meetings from the head of the Environmental Policy Board that says our wastewater plant can absorb about another 1,000 people, maybe at the most 2,000 people. When I did a back of the napkin estimate of projects which are proposed but not yet enacted, I come to 800 people. So, and I could go down the list, but I really want to have a long conversation. So I want to schedule a conversation, either a special meeting or have some of these issues be a topic where we set aside some time at an upcoming meeting, because it takes 8 years from the time you say, I want to think about having a wastewater plant, to actually having a wastewater plant. It takes that amount of time, and so-
I like that idea a lot, so I'm really excited to see Ted's and the EPB's final version for that plan. So you're suggesting that we have a special meeting where that can be presented and we can deliberate on it?
And planning board, planning in general, I also think we need to do a build-out plan for the NBR. You know, it's not responsible to be making provisions for all these multi-purpose structures if we haven't thought what the implications are on services in our wastewater plant. So those things are kind of connected, so
They are
I just want to
connected.
speak about planning in general.
But I think we should start with that discussion and review of the report on the wastewater treatment plant
Yeah.
capacity. So maybe we could do that. We could look at our upcoming.
Or should we do a workshop meeting maybe?
I'd
Yeah, I
like
think
to-
a workshop, this would be
Yeah.
a good workshop discussion.
So Gardner, they did a joint meeting with their planning board, their ZBA, and their town board.
Wow.
And I thought that was, and the thing that provoked that is, what do you call it, that big project, Heart something.
Well, yeah.
But that catalyzed a larger discussion. So, I mean, I think that these things, I'm not saying all the time that we talk about this, but I really like that idea, and I like that wastewater report could be a catalyst here for having a bigger conversation across our boards.
Well, the EPB is going to get that report at their meeting later this month, which means it should come to the board in early March. I assume so, anyway. So if we can think in terms of a workshop meeting sometime in March.
You want to pencil in March 21st as that workshop meeting?
Oh, no. I will be away. It's my wife's birthday. Yeah, we'll be up in Mohawk, so I can't leave. Can't do
We
that.
could do April 4th.
Sold. Like, why is that date familiar?
You know, but I think Gilmore has penciled in a green infrastructure meeting and presentation. I think ordinarily it'd be good to have both of those conversations at the same time, because they're certainly very related, but I don't know if we could finesse that.
Is,
Do we want to wait until we get the report from
Yes.
the EPB and then schedule something?
yeah, let's just not let it fall through the cracks, because I think it's, it's one of those things as a board over the next years, it's something that is a big issue.
I think it's a really, it'll be a really valuable document for us to have. I've chatted with Ted about it, and, it's stuff that we've discussed as a board in terms of what capacity is there, and I think he's taken it to another level and, used his expertise as an engineer to really drill down and get us a very valuable report. So it's definitely something that our village should probably use as a planning document for the future. So we should take some time to review it and discuss it thoroughly.
Do we have anything scheduled for a workshop next week?
No.
No.
Motion to move into executive session to discuss the specific history of a specific
Second.
individual.
I don't think we're going to be super long.
Yeah, we have.
Alex, should I put this off? Mike's on?
Her ex-husband it's one of those combo names.
Got it.
She grew up as Walter, got married from Walter.
Even though it's a-
No, it's to the people I'm trying not to sit on, to give Alex a little bit of room.
Okay,
All right, Bill.
Somewhat similar. Oh, no, different ones. Sorry, that was
final
yesterday.
item, I motion that we appoint Eve Walter Mauer as the
Perspective.
planning board chair effective June 1, 2018.
Second.
Discussion?
It's for June 1. We're just announcing
She's going to be
early.
chair June 1. All in
Upon
favor?
Michael Ziller- Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Aye. Did you say?
Buenos noches.
I don't know if Tim's still do this, but before I had a clue you were thinking about that, I texted him at the last